My name is Edin Francis Makwabe. I'm the consultant physician and nephrologist working with the Africa Healthcare Network here in Dar es Salaam. I'm also the chief medical director of AHN Tanzania. So I would like to welcome you all today into this AHN Nephrology Education webinar. I'll be coordinating this meeting or webinar with Dr. Jonathan Wara, a consultant physician and nephrologist from Aga Khan Teaching Hospital in Nairobi, and Dr. Ntarindwa, with our chief medical director in Kigali, Rwanda. So today's topic is patient-centered innovation. The time is now. And this is going to be presented by Professor Prabir Roy, who is a professor of medicine and co-director of University of North Carolina Kidney Center. He's also the founding American Society of Nephrology co-chair of the Kidney Health Initiative. Professor Prabir is the committee chair of the American Society of Diagnostic and Interventional Nephrology. He's also a KidneyX Innovation Accelerator Steering Committee member. And he's also an American Society of Nephrology Council member. So Professor Prabir, you are warmly welcome, and we are happy to have you today in the nephrology education webinar. You're welcome, Professor Prabir, and proceed with the presentation.
Absolutely. So let me at the start, first of all, let me make sure that you can hear me clearly, and that you can see my my video clearly.
Yes, we can hear you and we can see very clearly.
Okay, all right. And let me just change the video because I just want it to be a little thumbnail for myself. Actually, it's just showing you. Okay, you can leave it like this. Just give me one moment to adjust it. Maybe not. Just give me one moment. Okay, we shall. Okay. I think I'm going to minimize it. All right. So let me start off by saying that it truly is a great honor and privilege for me to be presenting at the Africa Health Network at the Fireside Series. I have always had, coming from India, very similar to Lloyd, had a very strong interest in renal replacement therapy in emerging economies, and what the partnership really can be between, not just between industrialized economies and emerging economies, but also within any one country in Africa or in India. There are clearly many different levels of care. The presentation that I'm going to talk to you about today is on something that has been quite near and dear to me for the last 6 years, particularly in my role with the Kidney Health Initiative, and it's going to be on patient-centered innovation. So with that, let me make sure okay. So with that, these are my disclosures, and none of them really, I think, would impact upon this talk, except the one, I'm a consultant for BD, and I will be showing you one of their devices, which I think will be interesting. So I'm going to divide this talk into 3 main parts, really. I will initially make the case for this huge need for patient-centered innovation in kidney diseases. I will then give you some examples of patient-centered innovation projects within the Kidney Health Initiative and the innovation accelerator that I will speak to you about, called KidneyX. And then finally, and I think very importantly, I will end with a number of messages for the future. But I want to start off with a very strong message for the present. And that message is that kidney disease is a global and worldwide problem. And I think you can see that when you have a number on the left part of the slide of 850 million people worldwide with kidney diseases. And you can also see that in terms of the significant cost for kidney disease care in the United States at $114 billion. Now, the point, though, that I want to make from this slide is that the large number indicates it's a global problem. And when you come to cost, the actual number doesn't really matter. It's going to be different per capita in different countries, but the messages from that cost are really the same across the globe, in that one, the cost of dialysis as it is now is really impossible for average citizens to bear. If you're a rich country, it's a huge drain on the exchequer. And if you're in an emerging economy, you struggle with this issue of who do you provide dialysis to, and often it just comes down to cost. And these are some of the issues that I will touch upon in the context of innovation. This slide just makes the case that even in a rich country, we don't do very well with kidney diseases. And I just want to point out to you that in the United States, the overall mortality rate at 3 years for all comers who come onto hemodialysis is 50%, and it's actually 41% at 5 years. But the larger problem clearly is in the emerging economies. And if you look at the slide on the left, you will see that the areas in dark are the areas where there is a very high number of patients on dialysis. So in the US, for example, it's about 1,400 per million. But the light blue areas are the areas where the prevalence of dialysis is much less. So for example, in Africa and in India and in China. And the point of all the China is definitely increasing, but China goes between 500 per million in, say, Shanghai, but down to 100 million, which is sort of similar to the number for India when you go into rural areas. And Africa in general is lower. But the message is that this is where most of the people in the world live. And that results in the slide to the right. And I apologize if I'm repeating things that are well known to you, but in 2020, if you look at, let's say, the middle of this slide, there are probably around 3 million people receiving kidney replacement therapy, but probably another 8 million people who need it but are not receiving it. And that number, unfortunately, is going to continue. And so I think that the question very much when we think about end-stage kidney disease at a global level is that we know that the future growth of end-stage kidney is going to be in the emerging economies. We know, and I've taken the example of India, that if it achieves even half of the prevalence rate of the US, there will be 1 million dialysis patients in India. And I would argue, and Lloyd may shudder when I say this, that the traditional model of in-center dialysis with large machines maybe is not the right path for the future. And you know, my dream would be that there is this sort of cell phone moment for kidney replacement therapy, where you suddenly have this novel technology in the area of kidney replacement therapy that could be used to improve quality of care, access to care, and also to reduce cost. Africa is critically important. So there are 1.2 billion people in Africa as a whole at the present time. That's going to double in the next 30 years. Almost all of the growth in new people coming onto the planet Earth is either going to be in Africa or in India. And of course, the current numbers, and these are 2013 data, for Africa per million are obviously very, very low, with the exception of South Africa at 125 per million. So how does one use innovation in the construct of kidney care worldwide? And I think you have to have a lot of innovation to do that. When we're talking about innovation, the unfortunate thing is that there's a relative lack of innovation in nephrology. And I say that because if you look at the number of randomized controlled clinical trials in the different subspecialties of medicine, over the last 50 years, you see that oncology and cardiology have the steep slope upwards, but nephrology is this green line pretty much near the bottom of the slide, almost, but not quite parallel to the x-axis. And of course, if you don't have randomized clinical trials, you're not going to have new therapies. So the left panel shows you that in the last 10 years, there have really only been 7 new drugs that are totally dedicated to kidney disease. And I would argue that that's one of the reasons why in a country like the US, our 5-year survival on hemodialysis is still only 41%. And that is really worse than pretty much every sort of cancer, as opposed to pancreatic or liver or some forms of brain cancer. And so the question then comes up, is it just drugs or is it also devices? And I would argue that for dialysis, it's very much about devices. So the panel on the left shows you a patient in 2015. And again, I would argue very strongly that even though there are more bells and whistles currently on the dialysis machines, that the basic construct of hemodialysis has really not changed over 50 years. Now, I want you to keep this picture in your mind, and I'm going to show you an example of the changes that have happened in 50 years in another technology-rich area of life in general, really, and that is technology. And I would argue that any one of those little devices that all of you have on your person, and I hope you're looking at me and not at your cell phones at the present time, but any one of these little devices really would have as much computing ability as this large IBM computer on the left. And so I think that another big reason for the poor value that we provide in end-stage kidney disease care, with value being defined as bad outcomes despite paying a huge amount of money, is that we have this lack of innovation and technology in the dialysis area. And so the question that I really want to address with this audience is, how can we break the cycle of a lack of innovation resulting in poor quality and outcomes and a high cost burden? And I'm going to submit to you that one of the ways that we can break the cycle is through something that I'm going to call patient-centered innovation. And the reason that this is important is that a patient's perspective of what is important is often very different from that of the physician, the payer, or the regulator. And this slide really brings out very clearly in the dialysis area about this dichotomy. So if you look at the top right panel, you see that if you have a set of patients on hemodialysis, that the things that matter to them, and of course this is in the setting where it's available to all, but in that setting, things like the ability to travel and dialysis free time and not feeling washed out after dialysis become very, very important. But if you look at the physicians who care for these same patients, we're more worried, because we're all nephrologists, about things like survival and hospitalization and drops in blood pressure, very different from what the patients are worried about. And I would argue that even though in many parts of the world, just getting dialysis is perhaps the biggest challenge, that for patients, these things are still true regardless of which part of the world you're in. And so then the question that comes up, and we've tried to address this, is how do we develop new therapies that address the issues that patients feel are important? And the way to do that, of course, is to make sure that you have patient input at every point in the drug development process, from initial ideation to clinical trial design, to patient preferences, to the use of patient-centered outcomes. And I would argue very strongly that the FDA, and I got this slide from a colleague at the FDA, has really been at the forefront of trying to make this happen. But just saying you want to do it doesn't make it so. You have to have organizations that focus on this. And that brings me to a short description of an organization that I was really privileged to be the founding co-chair of, which is the Kidney Health Initiative. And this is really a public-private partnership between the US Food and Drug Administration and the American Society of Nephrology. And it was formed in September 2012 through a memorandum of understanding between Dr. Ron Falk at UNC. So he's now actually my boss as the chair of medicine. And at that time, he was the president of the ASN, and Margaret Hamburg, who was the then FDA commissioner, and Patrick Archdeacon and I were the two initial co-chairs. And the goal of the Kidney Health Initiative was really to promote innovation and patient safety in the kidney disease area. Now, the way that I have always thought about the Kidney Health Initiative is that our goal was really to create a pre-competitive innovation substrate, if you will, that would facilitate the passage of novel therapies, drugs, devices, biologics into the kidney disease area. Now, we're currently a multidisciplinary collaboration and organization with over 100 members, as you can see on this slide. And what's even more important is that we have very active participation from federal agencies. So it's not just the FDA, but also the NIH, CMS, which stands for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which pays for dialysis in the US, and the Centers for Disease Control, which currently is having a very difficult time under the Trump administration. Now, one of the key features, and this is really, really important, of the Kidney Health Initiative is that right from the start, we created, and I'll tell you in a moment who created it, a Patient and Family Partnership Council. And this is our Patient and Family Partnership Council most recently. And it's made up of a number of patients who come from different organizations. And the goals for the KHI Patient and Family Partnership Council is really to keep the patient perspective front and center. And they do that by helping KHI engage and network with other patient organizations, by advising industry and research partners of the needs and preferences of patients, and also by identifying patients willing to participate in KHI projects. And I'll tell you in a moment what KHI projects are. The two really unique things about our Patient and Family Partnership Council is that there is representation across all the kidney patient organizations, and they have this laser-like focus on product development. And we as a community have benefited from them. So this picture is a picture of a group of us from the Kidney Health Initiative, including a very large number of patients, meeting with Secretary Azar, who's the head of Health and Human Services. And I would argue that we would never have been in this position had it not been for our partnership with our patient partners. So now, how does the Kidney Health Initiative aim to make an impact? So it aims to make an impact by doing projects in 5 different priority areas that include patient partnerships and biomarkers and clinical trial endpoints and clinical trial infrastructure. Now, to date, we've done over 18 projects, and our hope really, and this has in fact come true, is that the output from these projects, so for example, we have a large number of projects on clinical trial endpoints in lupus, in IgA nephropathy, in hyperoxaluria, in FSGS, and our hope is that when these white papers are out there, that they will actually facilitate the passage of newer drugs, devices, and biologics into the kidney disease area, because now we have a well-defined product development pathway. And it's not just white papers. We've put out data standards and workshops and roadmaps. And I'm going to talk a lot about a particular roadmap in a moment. So there are a number of patient-centered innovation projects within the KHI. I would argue that all of our projects have patient involvement and are patient-centered, but I'm going to pull out our roadmap for innovative renal replacement therapy, and I'm going to speak a little bit about that because I think that speaks to my earlier conversation about innovation and emerging economies and the provision of care. So the roadmap addresses the same issue that I spoke about earlier, the lack of innovation in dialysis. And I will argue that if you want to change the future, you have to know a little bit about the past. And a very short history of dialysis or chronic hemodialysis is that it started off in the 1960s with the advent of the Scribner shunt in the Pacific Northwest, so up in Seattle. And when dialysis initially started off, there really were not the resources to provide it to everyone. And so the question came up, who do we give it to? And there were actually these death panels which decided who would get dialysis and who would not. And one of the things that was within the decision-making process was social worth. So again, very different from the current time, but again, not very different, because again, I would argue that in many, many parts of the world, in fact, in most parts of the world, financial ability is still the most important factor that determines whether or not you can get dialysis. I will say, however, that we have come a long way since 1960s in the industrialized world, in many, many parts of the emerging world. The death panels are gone. Hemodialysis is now routine. There are almost 500,000 patients on hemodialysis in the US, and the current figure for the world is likely to actually be close to 3 million. And I would argue that as nephrologists, we should be proud of the fact that dialysis remains the only reliable and long-term form of organ replacement therapy. But, this is a big but, something, and that's about the power of. So Willem Kolff, who I'm sure all of you would have heard of and who's really privileged. I've never really met him, but I have seen him. Decades ago, he said, if the treatment of chronic uremia cannot fully rehabilitate people, then that treatment is inadequate. And I would argue that even though dialysis is the only form of organ replacement therapy that works, it doesn't really rehabilitate you. I would argue that in most cases, dialysis keeps you alive, no question about that, but it doesn't really allow you to live. And it was really with that background about rehabilitation, about being patient-centered, that we developed this technology roadmap for innovative renal replacement therapy. And it's available on the web. If you just put in KHI RRT roadmap, it will come up. And our goal was really to create a scientific and regulatory roadmap for innovative renal replacement therapy so that we could change the current construct of kidney replacement therapy. Now, the most important thing about our roadmap, and again, this is about patients, is that the roadmap is out there and published. It's going to be, it's a living, breathing document, so it's going to change. None of us know right now what the roadmap will result in, and we'll speak a little bit about that. But the one thing that we know is that whatever device comes out of the roadmap, it has to be something that improves the quality of life of dialysis patients. It has to be something that improves the ability of patients to work and travel. It has to be something that can liberalize diet and fluid regulation, reduce the medication burden, reduce the number of interventions, and very, very importantly, and this I think is the most important factor, it has to be something that reduces the financial impact of the treatment on the patient. Because I would argue that all chronic diseases drive people into poverty. It does that in the US, it does that in India, it does that in sub-Saharan Africa. But I would also argue that the chronic disease that does this the best, unfortunately, is likely to be chronic kidney disease and end-stage kidney disease, regardless of which country in the world you live in. So what does the roadmap really do? So the roadmap starts off with this focus on trying to develop an improved patient quality of life. And then it focuses on 4 solution areas. So one is enhanced dialysis. So how can we improve the current standard of dialysis? But then very quickly it goes into the creation of a portable or wearable dialysis, an implantable kidney replacement therapy machine, and finally a regenerated kidney. Now, in order to develop these solutions, we have identified 3 roadmap activity areas: kidney function, system enablers, and supporting activities. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on a couple of them. So the roadmap has 5 areas of kidney function: filtration and secretion and drainage, for example. And in each of those areas, there's a detailed list of activities that need to be done in order to get us closer to this dream of a portable implant generated kidney. And so if you look at the filtration section, for example, we have activities with near or midterm timelines that need to be done. So developing a blood filter that allows for filtration with no use of anticoagulants, I think, is a short-term biomaterial endpoint. But on the other hand, developing a non-clotting filter 40 liters of urine is perhaps a midterm goal. And so the whole roadmap is filled with these goals, if you will, that we hope will bring innovation and investment into this field. Perhaps the most important part of the roadmap, however, is in the area of supporting activities, regulation and reimbursement. Because the bottom line really is that you can have the best biology, the best drug or device, but if you don't have a well-defined development pathway, it's never going to get to patients. And this is really true in any country in the world. More than anything else, though, we see this road. Please do look it up. I would be personally very happy and proud if you do that. But more than anything else, we hope that the roadmap will serve as a catalyst to enhance innovation in this field. We hope that it will generate interest from industry and academia, particularly from people from outside the medical world, from engineering, for example, to enter into this field. And I will say I'm getting some feedback, so if everyone could please mute, I think that would help. And then very importantly, we want the roadmap to generate investment in this area: interest, investment, innovation. At the same time, we want the roadmap to incorporate the best science that's available. We want the roadmap to be multidisciplinary, commercially viable, and of course, very, very patient-centered. Now, everything that I've spoken about in the context of the roadmap till now is really about this being a technical roadmap. But please do remember that if you are a patient on hemodialysis, then this is actually a roadmap to freedom, because it's going to take you from being stuck in a chair with in-center hemodialysis to being able to travel with portable hemodialysis. And really, if we ever get to an implantable kidney, and I'll show you some interesting data, then we're going to have people that are completely normal. And I want to recognize Foko Wairinga from the Dutch Kidney Foundation for the initial version of this slide. And when you talk about freedom, please do remember that we are only limited by our imagination. So this is a picture of a dialysis patient for a couple of decades, really, from Seattle, Bill Peckham, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago. And this is a picture of him rafting down the Colorado River in the middle of the Grand Canyon. And he's got all of his dialysis equipment with him. And I would argue, of course, that this sort of freedom is only available to 0.00001% of patients on kidney replacement therapy. But why can't it be available to more people? I also want to talk about innovation in dialysis or in renal replacement therapy for emerging economies. Everything that I spoke about just now is valid, that I spoke about. Also other factors that are really, really important, because we want something, and I'm speaking as a we from, as having trained in India and coming from India. So India and Africa and the Middle and South America and China need cheap and sturdy and portable. We need something that's battery operated, that can so basically we need something that can run on 3 liters of bottled water. But it's not just innovation in the technology that is important. The process of care innovation is really important. So we need innovative payment and insurance schemes. We need innovation in access to care. Could we use the web and information technology for getting PD out to rural areas? Could we have mobile vans for hemodialysis therapy? I think these are process of care innovation is just as important as discovery innovation when it's about making an impact on patient care. Now, switching gears a little bit, having a roadmap is great, but how do you implement it? And often it's about funding and money. And that's why it's very, very important that in addition to the Kidney Health Initiative and the roadmap, we now have an organization in the United States called a Kidney Innovation Accelerator. And what this does is that it offers funding opportunities through a series of prize competitions that target specific unmet patient needs. The Kidney Innovation Accelerator is focused not just on devices, but on medications and on diagnostics and on patient-centered tools. We hope that the money that it offers will de-risk commercialization, but more than anything else, we want to create a sense of urgency on behalf of people living with kidney disease. And where it gets really exciting is this link between the Kidney Health Initiative and the Innovation Accelerator. So I spoke to you about the roadmap, which is really a technical construct in a way for the first prize competition for KidneyX, which was on redesigning dialysis. And the money in this prize competition obviously could be the implementation arm for the roadmap. So there's a link between the roadmap or between a KHI project and the Innovation Accelerator. At the end of the day, and these are some messages for this part of my presentation, what we're really trying to do, and again, this is true for every country, we're trying to develop an innovation substrate or an innovation ecosystem that goes from initial ideation and investment to druggable and deviceable targets, to clinical trial infrastructure, to regulation and reimbursement. And this is absolutely essential if you want the findings from biology to actually get to patients. The second message from this part of the talk is that significant progress, and this is something that I have learned personally, significant progress can be made if you provide a platform or a meeting place for collaboration and partnership between government and industry and academia and patients and regulatory and reimbursement agencies. And again, I think that KHI and KidneyX are examples of such a meeting place. And again, this is a message that is true again in whichever part of the world you're in. The players may be different, but the message about creating a meeting place, I think, remains exactly the same. And then the third message from this part of the talk is, and this I'm told is an African proverb, so it's particularly, I think, relevant and important to use it in this talk, but it basically says this is that if you want to go fast, go alone, go far, go together. And I will emphasize very strongly that when we're talking about KHI and the disruptive, we definitely don't want to just build a better dialysis machine. And if we want to do this, we have to go together: physicians, engineers, patients, regulators, and payers. So moving on to the shorter second part of my talk, all of you could argue across 5,000 miles that, Prabir, isn't all this too much too quickly? Do we actually have the science for this? Is this all pie in the sky? And the cartoon says, I'm a fiction writer in the grant proposal genre. I would argue that I don't think it's too much too quickly. So let me show you some examples. Let me go back on this. So over the next few slides, I'm going to show you some examples of new technology that I've picked out that I hope will also convince you that the future that I tried to describe is actually within reach. The first one has nothing to do with dialysis. It's all about the creation of a percutaneous fistula for dialysis without surgery. So let's, okay, here we go. And so what happens here is that you initially place a guide wire in the artery and the vein that are close to each other. You then have these special catheters, they're actually called WavelinQ now, that are placed into the artery and the vein. And what's special about these catheters is that they have a magnet. So when you activate the magnet, the catheters come together, it brings the vein and the artery together, and then you apply radiofrequency energy through this device. And that creates a connection between the artery and the vein. You then take your catheters out and blood flows from the artery and the vein. And then in order to direct the blood into the superficial and not the deep veins, you perform some coiling in not all, but some of the deep veins. And again, you can then use this endovascular fistula for dialysis. There is some nice data on 2-year survival. There is unfortunately not a randomized clinical trial, but the FDA has mandated follow-up of the patients who get this. And again, there are positives, there are negatives. There is another form of endovascular fistula that can actually be done under ultrasound. And again, that may be more relevant for many parts of the world, but it takes away the need for a surgeon. The second innovation that I want to focus on is that I think we're actually quite close to a wearable artificial kidney. And this is a picture of a young woman who's wearing this kidney. This Victor Gura has been a champion for this. Initial patient satisfaction scores were high. I think that there is going to be a push to have a prize for a wearable or an implantable kidney. And there was a paper in JAMA Insights which described its use in about 8 patients. There was one leak, so it's not perfect yet, but there was no real patient morbidity or mortality. The other innovation, and again, this is sort of going into the future, but I think it's within reach again, is the fact that for cell Vanderbilt, and is it's created size of my which for filtration has silicon nanomembranes, and for the reabsorption actually has tubular cells plated on these silicon nanomembranes. And this device has actually been placed in a pig. This is what it looks like. And the pig has not clotted the device over a couple of days, and we've actually been able to get some clearance. So again, this is a slide that Choudhury allowed me to show, but again, I think we're nearer perhaps some of these innovations definitely as compared to 5 years ago. And then there's a huge amount of advancement in this whole area of creating or regenerating a kidney. And this was published last year in Nature Methods, and it basically shows that if you grow the right cell types under flow conditions, that you can actually get a glomerulus with an afferent and an efferent arteriole. And what's particularly important in this is that these organoids seem to actually come together. They seem to come close to each other and integrate with each other. So again, the potential of a future regenerated kidney. So with that, I want to end with some messages for the future. And I actually have a number of messages here. The first message is that I really do believe, and I hope that I've been able to convince you, that patient-centered innovation, and it could be discovery innovation or process of care innovation, is absolutely essential if we want to address the issues that are important to our patients. And in order to do that, we have to involve patients at every step of the process. I also want to emphasize that it's the right thing to do. And please do remember, and this becomes more and more obvious as I grow older, that at some time in our life, we will all be patients. The other message for the future that I want to give to all of you is that equity in healthcare matters. It really, really does matter. And the next 3 slides, I'm really going to speak about the patient, innovation, and equity. So when you talk about involving patients at every step, it's not easy. You have to work hard. You can't just do lip service for it. And I think that the best example that I have seen of involving patients in the product development process, or the impact that this could have, comes from a video that was created by Celeste Lee, who I'll speak about in a moment. And I'm going to show you the video because I think it's a very powerful video about how important it is to involve patients in the product development process.
Hello, I'm Cece, fellow kidney disease patient. For 33 years, I've done dialysis, both chemo and PD. I had a transplant for 10 years, and as you can imagine, too many pills, shots, and accesses to mention. As kidney patients, you and I both know that a few things in life are not optional. Strength, courage, persistence, and determination. No matter what life throws at us, we try to stay balanced, maintain our routine, and remain positive. But let's face it, we are often in a holding pattern. Kidney disease treatments have not changed much over the years. The options for patients like us have largely remained the same for many years. You want to help change that? We need you. Each day we're asked to share our lives with our treatment. But now let's share our voice, ideas, opinions from patients like us. They matter. Key people are realizing our voices matter too. Here's what I found out. The Food and Drug Administration, often known as the FDA, is looking for patients living with kidney disease, like you and me, to provide input on how potential treatments of the future could look. Picture a big table. Around it are dialysis caregivers, researchers, doctors, nurses, and companies providing new products and treatments. They want us and our families to sit beside them and have a seat at this table. We'll work together to bring potential new treatment options, safe and effective ones, and ones that patients like you and me want and need. Imagine the future of your treatment. What does it look like? How does it improve your day-to-day life? This future doesn't have to remain just a dream. Join me and other patients to contribute our thoughts and make our ideas a possible reality. This is my invitation to you. Lend your voice and work with the people who can help make it happen, with one shared goal, living better with kidney disease. To learn more about how to share your voice and work with people to help make.
So that video and the voice in that video was actually Celeste Lee, and she's shown on the right over here. She was a founding member of the KHI Board of Directors, and Celeste died a couple of years ago, and she really died because she stopped dialysis because 25 years of dialysis had really made her bones so brittle that her sternum collapsed, literally collapsed onto her heart. And I think that her death really needs to be a charge to all of us to try and develop better therapies that address the issues that are important to patients. So the second point in my set of final messages that I want to mention is about innovation. So there's absolutely no question that if you want to innovate, you need to have ideas, you need to have resources. But even more important than ideas and resources, you need passion, patience, and persistence, the 3 Ps, if you will. However, I would also argue that in innovation, as in the most important thing is actually to believe. And my next video is really a story children's book, and it's all about believing. Let me play that now.
What do you do with an idea? One day I had an idea. Where did it come from? Why is it here? I wondered, what do you do with an idea? At first, I didn't think much of it. It seemed kind of strange and fragile. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just walked away from it. I acted like it didn't belong to me. But it followed me. I worried what others would think. What would people say about my idea? I kept it to myself. I hid it away and didn't talk about it. I tried to act like everything was the same as it was before my idea had showed up. But there was something magical about my idea. I had to admit, I felt better and happier when it was around. It wanted food, it wanted to play. Actually, it wanted a lot of attention. It grew bigger and be friends. I showed it to other people, even though I was afraid of what they would say. I was afraid that if they saw it, they would laugh at it. I was afraid they would think it was silly, and many of them did. They said it was no good. They said it was too weird. They said it was a waste of time and that it would never become anything. And at first, I believed them. I actually thought about giving up on my idea. I almost listened to them. But then I realized, what do they really know? This is my idea. No one knows it like I do. And it's okay if it's different and weird and maybe a little crazy. I decided to protect it, care for it. I fed it good food, I worked with it, I played with it, but most of all, I gave it my attention. My idea grew and grew, and so did my love for it. I built it a new house, one with an open roof where I could look up at the stars, a place where it could be safe to dream. I liked being with my idea. It made me feel more alive, like I could do anything. It encouraged me to think big, and then to think bigger. It shared its secrets with me. It showed me how to walk on my hands, because, it said, it is good to have the ability to see things differently. I couldn't imagine my life without it. Then, one day, something amazing happened. My idea changed right before my very eyes. It spread its wings, took flight, and burst into the sky. I don't know how to describe it, but it went from being here to being everywhere. It wasn't just a part of me anymore. It was now a part of everything. And then I realized what you do with an idea. You change the world.
So it's a storybook, but a children's book, but I felt it has an important message. So we've spoken about involving patients in the final messages. We've spoken about innovation. And then finally, I think equity in healthcare is critical. And what I want to emphasize is that what is happening currently in Africa, in India, and in China, in end-stage kidney disease area, is going to change the face of renal replacement therapy as we know it. But linked to this fact, I also want to emphasize something that Martin Luther King said. And he said this again decades ago. And he said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. And I would argue that there is no injustice in healthcare that is more stark than the lack of availability of a 50-year-old technology or the presence of a better technology that can actually be available to all. In other words, how do we develop new technologies that actually reduce disparities in care and not enhance disparities? I think that all of you are really on the front lines of this much larger issue of end-stage kidney disease care. Africa, when we spoke about the population and the changes, is going to be right at the front of this area. And I would argue that we have to do better. And I really do hope that some of the ideas that I've put forth can be adapted by some of you. I hope that some of the new technologies will be available to everyone. I hope that we could have a cell phone analogy where we can get wonderful technology that is cheap and changes the way we practice kidney care. So with that, thank you so much for your attention. And Lloyd and the Africa Health Network, thank you so much for this invitation.
Thank you very much, Professor Choudhury, for such a stimulating talk. We have been amazed at your style of presentation and that it was so clear for such a complex topic. Things which we have a rough idea about, but we cannot put it in particular manner and as a particular roadmap. And we are very much glad that you have given us such a topic. The audience, you're welcome to ask questions. You can ask through the chat, or if you want to speak, you can raise your hand and then you can speak directly.
If you would allow me to start, let me know.
Okay, Professor Gamal, you can go ahead.
Yeah, actually, Professor Prabir, this is a very excellent and very stimulating talk, which I rarely encountered such an encouraging approach. Thank you very much for your presentation. Actually, you were speaking about several crucial points, including the equity of health services. And considering this equity, we need to have an equity of facilities to diagnose and to serve kidney diseases worldwide. And in our continent, in Africa, there might be a great deficiency in the primary diagnosis and detection of the patients to reach these patients and reach these categories. And in the previous meeting, I have been speaking about African countries who do not even have nephrologists or do not have laboratories to diagnose the kidney patients. So we need to build up all these facilities hand in hand with the newer approaches you are considering, which are really marvelous. Another point is that I was fascinated about your consideration of going far, not going rapid. And in this aspect, I would consider that it is very wise to collaborate with all the institutions and organizations and societies who are caring for this initiative of involving patients or patient-centered approaches. And I would suggest that you can, as KHI or Kidney Health Initiative, approach the International Federation of Kidney Foundation, which I am a member of the council now, and I was a previous president of. And I believe that the IFKF is very keen about the approach to patients first. And I'm sure you are aware that it is a patient-centered and includes many non-physicians among it and many patient organizations among it. So we need to collaborate with each other to give hand to our communities in all aspects, in giving services, diagnosis, upgrading nephrologists, and delivering the best approaches to kidney disease as well.
So all very, very good comments. And I've been scribbling down some responses. So your first is probably the most important, right? I have spoken a lot about innovation, whether it's in an industrialized country or in an emerging country, but I've spoken about innovation at the end, which is in the context of dialysis. And you make the very important point that we really need innovation early on in terms of diagnosis and prevention. And I would argue that the innovation that we need there is very much a process of care innovation. And there are many studies, for example, that what often works well, and I'm sure you've tried this in Africa, is taking somebody from the community with perhaps a 10th standard or 10th grade or 12th grade education, training that person for maybe 3 months or 6 months on basic prevention in the area of medicine and kidney disease. So taking blood pressure, looking at the urine, maybe taking a creatinine, and then sending that patient back into the community that he or she comes from in the role of a community health worker, for example. And again, in India, and Lloyd, you can comment on this, there's now a large insurance scheme that the current government has put out that actually brings in not just, and this can be controversial, not just allopathic type nurses, for example, but also uses the more traditional forms of medicine in India, like Unani, Unani and Ayurvedic medicine. And my father was a big proponent of both of these issues, and I do believe that when done in the right way, this can address some of your issues. But you do, again, as in every country, including the US at the present time, leadership is key for that. The second point that you made was about partnerships and going together. I could not agree more. I am familiar with the International Federation of Kidney Foundations, and what I would say, what I would take from this meeting or give to all of you is, that KHI is not just a US organization. We have organizations from other parts of the world. So the ERA-EDTA is a member. The University of Oxford is a member. So we have research organizations, institutions that are interested in healthcare, and also national organizations. So if there are organizations in Africa that would like to be a member of the Kidney Health Initiative, the cost is very, very little for a healthcare organization. Please do reach out to me. I'd be happy to put you all in touch. And I will also reach out to the International Federation of Kidney Foundations. So thank you for all of those comments. I have a question. How far are we from an artificial kidney being used in routine clinical practice? So the answer to that is, I don't know at the present time, and it would depend on what you describe as an artificial kidney. So if we're talking about a wearable kidney, I think that could be out there within a couple of years. If you're talking about an implantable kidney, that might be 5 years, it might be more. I would say that the biology part is not as advanced as the device part. So regenerating the kidney, it could take a bit longer. But wearable and portable, I think are definitely, I would say, within 2 to 3 years. I will also say that the Kidney Innovation Accelerator is going to be funding an artificial kidney prize. There should be details on that available in the next month. And again, we hope that that will serve as a catalyst for innovation in this area. And of course, the ISN has also funded a prize which has been to create innovative dialysis that can be done anywhere in the world. And it's focused around a solar heater that can purify fluid for PD. Other questions?
I have this one.
Yes.
Can I? Yeah, thank you very much, Prabir. It's wonderful, especially to see that roadmap. It clarifies a lot of issues. Getting into device development actually is something even the engineers do not know. I mean, at least my experience in India. Starting into the device, you have the breadboard where you put the whole system, the circuit in place and see if it works. Then you have the prototype development, and then the design phase, and you redo the design, come to a final product, and then the commercialization. I mean, it's a huge cycle. Do you think, this can be aided in any way, like in terms of advice, from the West, or is there some sort of body that can help in these sort of, device development processes in the roadmap? Is there something like that? Where supposing you have somebody from Egypt developing a dialysis device, or somebody from India developing a dialysis device, because quite often even the engineers, they have no clue of what the patient is, the concept of, patient-oriented innovation. They have no clue. And, right. and they make devices, but they don't ask the questions that we need by the bedside. And that has been my practical experience. So what happens in the bargain is a lot of mistakes are made. You go into a device development not thinking of the regulatory aspects. So then you get caught, and then you have to turn back and then start with the regulations, and then go back and then go regulatory hand in hand to go into it. The other thing you also see is regulations, of course, are changing. In the developing world, it's very difficult to go into device development. For example, going to the CE. FDA is out of question because it's completely out of our pockets. Even going to CE now, which is now changed again. Now you have an Australian regulatory. So is there something that sort of unifies here in terms of regulatory aspects when it comes to the roadmap?
Yeah, so all really very good points. And, I don't have the answers to all of them, but what I will say is that, this is not meant to be an American initiative. It is, there is let me put it this way. There is an offshoot of the things that I've spoken about that aims to look at that aims to take an international view. they are addressing the exact same things that you've been talking about, right? You need a regulatory pathway, you need a reimbursement pathway, you need to be patient-centered, you need to tailor things for, and when you need to be patient-centered, it's also an issue of risk-benefit that the patient is willing to accept, right? So if it's a question of using a dialysis machine that is very cheap, with double the chance of death or 30% more, as opposed to not using it because of the cost, that's a very different risk-benefit ratio that needs to be presented. So there is an international group that is looking at this, and Lloyd, as I think maybe one of the best parts of this meeting, and again, it brings out the point that it's all about getting people together, is that I would be delighted to introduce you or your colleagues to two people, Murray Sheldon, who is in the FDA, but is really been a champion of trying to get this roadmap, to have a very international flavor. And also Foko Wairinga, who I adapted the slide from, who's been a champion. And I think that Africa is an area that has not been sort of included. There are people from Europe, from Japan, from China, and I think from other parts of Asia. But I think it would be very useful for Africa to be involved, because, you know, this is where the future, I'm not going to say dialysis. I think the future in terms of volume of kidney replacement therapy, whatever that may be, is actually going to be in Africa. It's going to be in India and China. China's probably down the path already that it's going to go down a conventional pathway. Africa is still there, where it's possible that new technologies could result in that cell phone sort of analogy that has changed life all over the world.
Yes, absolutely. Because there are strong points.
I have said, go ahead, Lord.
Sorry. There are strong points in India in terms of technology development, because they're very skilled manpower, whether it be biotechnology or whether it be the electronics or the mechatronics that is there in India, in the high institutes like IIT. We know IIT very well from our childhood days. There's very, very strong people out there who can do a lot of things. But the issue is there is no sort of guidance in the engineering field to sort of tackle the medical issue. So the amalgamation of medicine and technology is one thing. The other thing is, even in Africa, I think there's a lot of scope of doing a lot of work in Africa and getting in the devices and things like that. I mean, so it's really nice when we have a roadmap with a unification of people from across the globe to see what we can actually develop. Yeah. My biggest, I say, in India, for example, we had those three motorcycles: Kawasaki, Bajaj, Hero, Honda. Yeah. So they came in for the Indian market. And then our Indian companies actually developed got hold of the technology. And today in Africa, we see it is all Hero or Bajaj or TVS bikes that run in the whole of Africa, at least in East Africa. And that is all technology that is coming from Japan. So this is an example I always remember. I mean, I think that unification is really a good idea. And it's a wonderful talk, Prabir. I mean, I really learned a lot, and it's an outstanding presentation that made it so simple, actually. Thank you very much.
No, I agree. I will comment that just two very quick points. There are some companies that are interested in this area. Again, there are large companies. So Medtronic is very interested in this area. They actually have a research center in Bangalore that I've visited. The second point that I would make is that, you know, when you look at the roadmap, you should be confident to think out of the box, because, you know, we put things together, but we are completely cognizant of the fact that it's a living, breathing roadmap. And we're also completely cognizant of the fact that in different parts of the world, there could very well be adaptations to that. So I think that you should look at the roadmap with, you know, with those lenses. And then the last point, and this is a personal point, and again, I think Lloyd and I are both from India, but I think a lot of people would say that what could work in India could work well in Africa and vice versa. Similarly for South America and for Southeast Asia. China is a little bit different, but I think that most of the rest of the world is quite similar. So I think, you know, the linkages between Africa, India and Africa, and I know I'm putting Africa together, and it's just a huge continent and it's so vast and diverse, but even having said that, I think there's an opportunity. I do have one last question, and since from Mazhar, and Mazhar says, with the wearable kidney, how will complications frequently seen at in-center hemodialysis, like intradialytic hypotension, etc., be addressed? And I want to answer that question, and I would argue that there will be other complications potentially, and you know, leakage is one, and thrombosis could be another, but I don't think that intradialytic hypotension will be an issue, because now you can actually take fluid off just the way we do in acute kidney injury with CRRT potentially. You're taking it out 16 hours, 24 hours a day. And so, and again, to your question, I do think that so many of the problems that we have in dialysis are also cardiovascular issues, and it's related to fluid. And so again, the wearable kidney, I think, has a great benefit.
Thank you very much, Professor. Just as a final question from myself, your last slide, we have to do better, is a prick on our conscience that we have failed our patients for the last 50 years, you have said, with the same technology. Innovation is key to this, and you have mentioned 5 things about innovation: the ideas, the resources, the passion, the patience, and the persistence. Of these, which ones do you think have contributed most to this lag in innovation over the last 50 years compared to cardiology and neurology?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I thought you were going to ask me which of them do you think is the most important. So I will ask that. I will answer that first.
Okay.
And Lloyd may know that as well. I think persistence is the most important, actually, in actually getting innovation. In the ideas, yes. Resources, yes. In terms of what has failed us, yeah. So it's a very important question. So I will be critical here. I can speak to the United States. Because, you know, I think the US has been in the happy position of having a technology for some time and the resources of being able to change. And I would say that we've had the lack of innovation for 2 main reasons. The first is, and I think what I've said in this talk aims to try and change both. The first is, I would probably describe it as sloth, or just an acceptance of the status quo, right? In 1968, it was possible to dialyze somebody. In 1973, in the US, dialysis was available to everyone through federal legislation. And I think that as a community, instead of continuing to change things, we rested back and said, now we have the solution. I think that it's okay to do that for 10 years, but not for 50 years. I think the second reason is that the system in the US grew up around 2 large dialysis companies, and definitely over the last 10 years, DaVita and Fresenius. They are both companies that are trying to expand worldwide. They are companies that are very good at what they do, but there's clearly no incentive, if you are doing so well with the technology you have, to change things. And so what I think that KHI, the roadmap, and the innovation accelerator are trying to do is that they're opening a door into another form of dialysis, another form of renal replacement therapy. And if DaVita and Fresenius and other companies want to come through, and I hope they will come through, that's wonderful. But if not, I think opening the door will result in other companies coming through so that we can change things. And I don't think in the US we opened that door. And that's as much a fault of, you know, resting back, taking things easy, not disturbing the status quo, not bringing people from outside of nephrology to try and tackle the problem. The issue that Lloyd said, right? If you have a small company that has a wonderful membrane to filter seawater, we hope that the roadmap in Kidney X will bring that small company in and use their technology to filter blood instead of seawater. And then, of course, some of the lobbying and the, some lobbying and the advocacy to retain the status quo. That's, and I am critical of that. I think everyone would be, but I think it's not just the faults of the LDO. It's our fault as a community for not demanding more. It's the fault of the government, I would say. And I would say that this government has really, for whatever other issues has done very well, because they're paying the money. They should be demanding better. I will stop. It's a very good question, and those are my answers. I'm going to put that, Lloyd, I know we've gone on, but since some of you are still here, I'm going to put that question back to you. In Africa, what do you think is the most important thing to change, to try and achieve the things that I spoke about?
I think the first thing is, as Professor Jamal pointed out, you know, bringing in renal care into different areas. Now, we started in Burundi. I mean, I've said this a number of times. But once you have a center coming in there, people become aware of the whole of the kidney problem. That's one thing. And then you have local incentives that come up and put in, you know, the public, the state, the government comes to understand this is the need. And then they put up their part of it. And so once you have infrastructure that comes into play in a particular region, these things come in very easily. Now, once you, and today's world, like, you know, us talking to each other, technology is so developed. Even here, for example, the cell phone technology is phenomenal, actually. Whatever you can do there, we can do here in Africa as well. So it's not in any way behind, even in the US, I would say, because the same technology they build. So once you have something developed there in the US, there will be a number of people across the globe who will actually go on the same route as we have seen in so many other domains outside of the medical domain. And then competition will come up, and it will come down in terms of price as well, for sure. Like in Africa, Egypt can develop, I mean, I'm not naming names, but East Africa, there are so many countries that can come up. South Africa, there is. So there are a lot of countries that can actually develop these things. And it's a question of little time. And the other thing is, of course, the health human capital, you know, training programs to bring in nephrologists, you know, the training physicians into them. That the ISN has been doing a pretty good job. And that is something that is also mushrooming within each country as well. So I think it's a little time. And looking back in India in 1981 in the city of Bangalore, we had no dialysis. I mean, I know when I looked around personally for a very close relative of mine, there was no dialysis in 1981. I had to take them right up to Vellore, 4-hour trip to take them in for dialysis. Today in Bangalore city, we have 93 dialysis centers and 120 nephrologists. So that is the situation. So that will come into Africa, I'm sure, even from, I can say from 2015 to now, if you see, from I've been in Africa, it has changed. It has definitely changed and changing. And there are so many young, good physicians who are aiming to be nephrologists or in the process of being nephrologists. So this game will change completely. It's a question of little more time.
Yeah, no, I could not agree more. And, you know, for my wife and I were talking just today, very similar to you. In 1996, I almost went back to India, and we were just talking about, and there were, even at that time in Delhi, there were very few. There were maybe 25 nephrologists in Delhi, 20. And, you know, I've had a wonderful career that I'm so grateful to the US for, but I still sometimes wonder that if I had gone back right at the beginning, or relatively in the beginning, I would have been the first nephrologist in Apollo Hospital, Lloyd, at Indraprastha. That's the job. I'd met Pratap Reddy, and that was the job I was going to. You know, it could also have been a very fulfilling life. And so for all of you, you're really at the you're really at the start, and I agree with Lloyd. Things are going to change, and you're just at the right place at the right time, and that's a wonderful, wonderful place to be in. All right.
Thank you, Prabir. Prabir, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for coming, and I'd like to thank everybody.
All right.
And if we need your contact, probably we'll get it from
Absolutely.
Dr. Lloyd.
Well, yes, and stay safe, stay well in these troubled times. Look after yourself.
All right. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you so much, Prabir. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.